Baby Don't Shoot, a gay love story featuring a Luigi Mangione type. Written by Sally Strait, narrated by Gray Trainer. Find them on Instagram at GREYTRAYNOR. To support this podcast, give it 5 stars and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Listener discretion is advised. Chapter 19. On her desk at Chambers Solutions, her powder green mug with a jumping frog under the phrase, "Let's hop to it, a gift from Shayla's daughter," tinkled against the small glass globe Shayla bought for herself, a reminder to travel as much as she could despite her average salary and little vacation time. A rumble like that meant the paper delivery was arriving, and out in the hall, lit by frosted jade sconces, a man in loose brown pants was pushing a trolley, stacked with 4 boxes of white paper and 1 other box filled with the same, except for a single slash of green going diagonally across the page, needed for the upcoming Chambers Solutions holiday newsletter. It was September, but Shayla liked to stay ahead of things, the early bird getting the worm of decorative paper at a discount price. Again, her mug clanked against the globe, this time harder, a distinct clang, and then came another. Shayla imagined that extra box of Christmas paper panache must be causing the delivery man to strain, his calves taut, a tight core engaged. But another sharp note of ceramic on glass meant that someone out in the hallway was bounding to the main office door, the only occupied room on the floor, amongst conference rooms that weren't to be filled for another hour. Shayla was certain. She memorized the conference room schedule every day. That's what made her so great at her job. Her well-manicured but colorless fingernails retreated into the safety of her palms. These clangs meant peril, an emergency. The consummate professional, Shayla stood as the door burst open, not an easy feat considering its thickness, made of oak, craftsmanship that would outlive her, which might be sooner rather than later, because this uninvited guest had a misshapen but unmistakable gun. Shayla's long fingers began to itch, prepared to muffle her ears. "Ted!" she screamed over her shoulder. "Lock your door!" Ducking, Shayla hid behind her desk. A quick look behind her, Ted's shadow swiftly moved across the beveled strip of milky privacy glass next to his office door. He was safe, but in a wide room with only her desk and, at least 10 feet away, a leather couch anchored to a wall. How was Shayla supposed to fully shield herself? "I'm not gonna hurt you." The gunman's voice didn't match the monster she imagined. Panicked, scared out of her mind, all she had seen before ducking was the gun, and, filling in the gap, Shayla constructed a mental image of a hard, swollen brute, the kind that transforms, one that's first a man, then becomes something evil and chaotic with torn clothing, sharp teeth supported by a strong, clenched jaw. But the violent man's voice had landed soft on her ear, sounding young. Propped on all fours, her houndstooth skirt tight over a defined backside, Shayla tried to still her rapid breathing, thinking that if he were young, maybe she could tame his irate naivete and convince him not to kill her, or anybody. "You don't have to do this." Her voice bounced off the floor, coming right back at her, her own fear stoking itself. "Yes, I do," he replied. Shayla winced, her sand-colored skin crinkling at the eye. His voice was closer, and she had no plan beyond surrender as a means of humanizing herself, something she saw on TV. It occurred to her that her desk was filled with scissors and letter openers, but those were close contact weapons, basically nothing compared to the long-range annihilation in his grip. "You're not my target," the gunman said. She feared those might be the last words she'd ever hear, because he had closed the distance. He was standing next to the mug, the globe. He was practically standing over her. There would be no more late nights, talking with her daughter Emily. No more making coffee for her when she had to stay up late and study. No more setting down a hot cup saying, "Now don't stay up too late, honey." Shayla could kiss all of that and the entire world goodbye. Her trip to England, despite the food, had been nice. She wished she'd have known it was to be her final one. The red of Shayla's painted lips disappeared as she curled them away, swallowing, wanting to vanish completely. But then she stood, to face her killer, to face her fate, to face what she could afford to see before lights out. During Emily's upbringing, Shayla had always brought her books about empowered women, no matter what their appearance or what they had faced. Susan B. Anthony, Harriet Tubman, Joan of Arc. Plucky women who kept going until they couldn't, who tried because they had no choice. They had lived, and stood proudly, and Emily wouldn't know it. How could she? But Shayla hoped that some ripple, a feeling, would come her daughter's way, and she would know that in her last moments, Shayla had stood up in defiance, fearless. But the gun, tiny, warped, and oddly smooth for a firearm, was at the man's side. The young man, the handsome young man, in a tight black shirt and black jeans that fit him in all of the right places, hugging the good parts, when for most, they simply hung on the body. Were the clothes tailored, Shayla wondered, hands in the air despite a mind so far from danger? It was like she was standing before a dashing, masculine character from Roadhouse. Not the one with Jake Gyllenhaal, but the original film with Patrick Swayze. A man with chutzpah and a hard body, a piece of meat you could sleep with and not just next to. Oh, the sound spilled from Shayla's lips, redder than before. She had bitten them at the sight of the man. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, revealing a perfect set of teeth, the big kind, a humanizing feminine aspect to this wild fellow. God, Shayla thought. Was the addition of the firearm actually turning her on? Again, she winced, but this time out of embarrassment. She hated guns, was clearly scared of them, scared of dying because of one. But this young man wasn't going to hurt her. He had said so. Having seen every episode of Law & Order SVU, it leapt into her mind that she was living out a sexual fantasy of many, like how some people, weirdos, like to be choked by the hand of someone they trust in the throes of sex. This was absolutely not a fantasy of Shayla's. She wasn't depraved enough to have fantasies outside the daydream of lingering kisses from long-haired men, and she didn't know this young man, but she couldn't deny that he spoke his disarming words with sincerity. "Get out of here." He tossed his head over his shoulder, revealing more of his neck, peppered with stubble and a straight line, a nick on his defined Adam's apple. This was Shayla's cue. Emily, she thought. Exploring the rest of the world, she thought further. It was all coming back to her, the promise of a new day. Everything painful and beautiful and dull as a plank filled her brain as she scurried around her desk and fled the room, her bounding steps eliciting only a soft chime from her mug and globe. What would happen next would bother Shayla for the rest of her life, involving group therapy and the need for experimental psychoactive medications, as well as a wet seat every time she encountered a defined chest in a tight black shirt. But to Shayla, that was living, trying to face what was in front of you, instead of letting the past completely define you. Chapter 20. It took nothing for Mario to blast through the vertical window next to Ted's office door, despite being barricaded with a cheap desk that the young man hopped over with the same ease as his bullet had conquered the glass. Ted had only a coffee-colored filing cabinet to shield him from the lithe gunman. The older man's other option, aside from losing a short bout of hand-to-hand combat, was to try to break the bay window opposite the door. But he didn't think he could successfully break the glass or work up the nerve to jump, end it before someone beat him to the blow. It was all so scary and unexpected, especially seeing the distant, determined look in Mario's eyes. The warmth, the young man's jovial quality, the breezy way he moved, they were gone. Even watching the young man slide through the broken window in a heavy robotic way, Ted wouldn't have known who it was, if not for that voice, handling Shayla in the waiting room, never once yelling, but also speaking without a lick of that Mario charm. Ted understood he had dampened their shared sunny day, but to warrant this? How could Ted be cowering in front of the man he swore he might have loved? But when Mario lingered, towering yet immobile, Ted knew he might have a chance at survival. Only it was a question, not a pleading for his life, that fell out of his mouth. "Why?" Ted asked. Mario remained motionless, silent. Ted, down on his hands and knees, was still unsure if he would exit his office alive, but it seemed he might at least get an answer to his question. "My mother, she's gone." Mario's voice was practically a whisper, downright diminutive compared to the voice he used with Shayla. Ted had known him long enough to identify the dreamy tone he sometimes inhabited, but this wasn't that. This was the voice of someone dejected, lost deep inside himself. Ted winced and dipped his head toward the ground, feeling a discomfort in his chest. No matter that the young man had come to take his life, Ted still had space in his heart to feel guilt, empathy, and sadness for the loss of a woman he had hoped to meet. He hadn't had delusions of family-style dinners or holidays with Mario's mom. But When Ted was optimistic that his lying about attempting to reinstate the surgery would keep him and the young man together, Ted did envision at least meeting her, a polite handshake over a threshold, with perhaps the option to cross over, come in for some uncomfortable but, at the very least, congenial tea. "Please, Mom, this is the man I love," Mario might say if his mother brought up their age difference with a tone of, "How could you possibly?" and "Just what is going on between you two?" And maybe Mario would have softened her over them being together. Maybe she wouldn't have even needed softening. The sweet woman who Mario had described in detail weeks ago, on the couch only feet away from where the young man now stood with a tiny, misshapen gun. Speculation and distraction from a painful, gruesome death was all Ted had, and he thought the tenderness of a naked Mario bragging about his mother on a couch they had soiled together might be the perfect mental image to go out on. "I'm so sorry, Mario," Ted said. In business classes, a prerequisite, Ted had learned professional etiquette and the art of selling oneself. The professor, a mustachioed man with red cheeks, instilled in the class that the sweetest sound to another person was their own name. But Ted's utterance of Mario wasn't just a simple manipulation to survive. Ted missed saying it, missed seeing the young man. It had been almost a full month since they last saw one another, and the Mario withdrawals atop the shame of being found out had been brutal. Ted had first returned to slobhood after promising to help Mario and his mother, but he had furthered into a robotic slob since seeing the trash can of Mario's vomit, a pile of his own cruel pro-con lists, and his front door open despite Mario having slammed it, swinging in the breeze, a waving hand. Sayonara. Though, in this new downtrodden form, Ted did manage to get through the workdays without telling Shayla to push meetings or cancel anything. No, Ted of a barren heart craved meetings, calls, bug fixing, and code writing because it got him out of his mind. Where a brilliant smile blazed with the light of a sunset, one could never successfully capture in a photo, a gilded memory that disintegrates the more it's handled. The weeks had rolled by, taking Ted farther and farther away from Mario, creating this longing sorrow mixed with the pain of letting the young man down. Another reason Ted didn't use anything in his desk to attack the young man. He knew Mario's revenge wasn't without cause. A wet feeling hit Ted's hand. He was crying over what he had lost and what he was about to. "Please, forgive me," Ted said, face still toward the ground, cherry red, veins straining, afraid of his once lover, and also too pained to bear witness to what Mario had become, a monster he had a hand in making. "Stand up," Mario said. Once again that whisper, light years away, as lonely as an ant adrift at sea. Ted didn't want to give in to the impulse to literally shake with fear, but it was his body's answer to the situation. He hoped maybe it made him a pitiful enough target to release. Stumbling, the older man got to his feet. The knees of his dress pants had wrinkled from his crouching, but Ted had lost so much weight over the past month, from fretting, a stomach too ashamed to find itself hungry, that their stark bagginess was best given away, rather than solved with a trip to the tailor and a steam clean. Eyes clenched, so hard it made his face itchy, waiting for the shot, Ted wondered if they would bury him in the suit. But then he remembered Shayla had gotten away. Her efficiency and shrewd eye would never allow Ted to be swimming in his clothes for an open casket. She'd get his measurements at the morgue and speed walk on over to a men's warehouse. The older man was just waiting there, in the eyes shut dark in silence, waiting to die. Despite what Ted had done, he thought it was cruel of Mario to have him blindly guess the moment of his own death. A metallic thud sounded, and Ted jumped. "Oh my God!" But before Ted could get all his words out, a pair of defined arms wrapped around him. A scratchy material brushed his cheek. "I'm sorry." Mario began to weep, shuddering on top of Ted. I'm sorry. I don't know." Ted's arm stayed raised in defense, in deference, while the young man leaked tears into his neck. On the floor, the gun sat without an owner, the butt of it peeking out from under his desk, and any sane person in this situation would have kneed Mario in the crotch and leapt toward the gun. But here was a young man who had just lost his mother and been betrayed by his lover. This was not a random attack or one of pure cruelty. It was the decision of a lost someone who felt like they had no one to turn to. which is why Ted lowered his arms and used them to embrace the wailing Mario, gasping in between his falling tears. And Ted would be that person for Mario, that someone to care, that someone to love him. Feeling the young man's body under his touch, it was like a roadmap home, the promise that they might be able to work things out. They had both done wrong by one another, but they could reform. Ted rubbed Mario's strong back, only a thin piece of black cloth in between his hands and that cross-hatch of muscle, a living, twisting, turning kaleidoscope of strength and definition. Grasping past the shoulder blades up to that thick neck, Ted pulled back and gripped Mario's face as the young man continued to both sob and struggle to take in air. Ted used his burgundy tie to try to wipe Mario's tears and running nose, but the torrents were leaking fast out of the young man, unstoppable. And then Ted let go of his tie, thinking, let this water flow. With his discovered lie and Mario's aggression now behind them, they could bank off this release, use it as a momentum to fly higher, together. In between the gasps and the moaning cries, Mario tried to speak.
Ted, I don't know what...
But the older man tried to soothe him. Shh, it's okay. It's okay. You made a mistake. So did I, and I'm so sorry for what I did and what happened. Your mother... Mario's cries reached another crescendo, and Ted took him back into his arms, the young man's wet eyelashes tickling his neck and his perfect head of curly hair positioned right under Ted's nose for an intoxicating whiff. But Ted stopped himself. It would have felt wrong, disgusting even, if the older man got a hard-on with his weeping lover in his arms. But that synchronicity between the two of them arose like cigarette smoke. And before Ted could feel even an ounce of guilt over his carnal thoughts, a shift of Mario's hips occurred. And then it occurred again. Though there were tears and residual snot, the wailing had quieted, and Mario's hips shifted once more. Then, after a fourth time, it was pretty clear what the young man was asking for. Are you sure? Ted asked, swallowing down his hunger before he knew it was okay to feel as such. Mario chose to deliver his words the way Ted loved hearing them, as clear as a cloudless sky and straight into the air. Fuck me, the young man said, and it felt like 1,000 doves took flight off of Ted's body. He felt light and alive and ready to do as told. While Ted kicked off his dress shoes and shimmied out of his suit, Mario yanked the desk away from the door, a barricade to a bed of sorts. Now the 3D printed ghost gun was exposed to the elements, looking silly and out of place, lavender corduroy shorts on a fresh powder ski run. But the weapon could be forgotten, and, with both of them fully naked in a matter of seconds, it was. Mario and Ted embraced, wriggling around to get as much skin on skin as they could. The older man wanted every inch of Mario, perhaps more than he ever had. This was rebirth, renewal, refusion, and reuniting in the sour sweetness of what could have been another tragedy. The young man laid himself on the oak surface of the desk, looking as perfect as ever. Ted's view through the young man's bent, hairy legs, framing that gorgeous face, on the precipice of smiling despite the still running tears, feeling as Ted felt, a pang of goodness after such a long stretch of dark, dark emotion, a kind of relief. This was a new beginning. Ted spit in his hand, then coated his cock before he parted Mario's cheeks, a line of hair around the inner crack, lining the way to that beautiful puckered asshole, where Ted spit as well. Two spinning things, Mario whipped both legs up to rest on Ted's freckled shoulders, and the older man felt exactly as he had peeking through that bathroom stall, and outside in the gauntlet, and on the couch in his lobby, and in his own bed. He felt lucky, and he felt whole. I think, Ted, Mario began, sniffling through his words before dragging a forearm across the moisture. I think I might love you. Ted leaned closer, his bare knees kissing the edge of the desk, his face getting closer and closer to Mario's, who nodded with a simpering smile at what was about to happen. I think I might just feel the same, Ted replied. His embarrassed stumbling couldn't be completely helped. The older man was who he was. His hand was more confident than his voice, and it found his hard dick without the added help of looking, angling it up toward Mario's hole. There was a height difference in the matter of this anal occasion, but it could be worked with. It could be rectified. Ted pierced the hole, and both their eyes went wide. Mario at the immediate sensation, and Ted at the military-grade style gun he could see through the broken window of his office. Chapter 21. It wasn't hard for Mario to threaten someone outside Ted's office building for their work badge, just like it wasn't hard to saunter through the office lobby, gun wrapped inside a fresh t-shirt under a sea of plastic bullets, all hidden away in his backpack, and lift his head in a confident signal of salutation at the front desk security guard, who was too busy lifting his own head in return to notice that a young white man had just scanned himself in, looking nothing like the squat Indian man named Parjeet Lal that appeared on his computer screen. And while it was difficult having to scare Ted's secretary, it couldn't have been avoided, though the pinched fear in her face would be hard for Mario to forget. But after all that, it was somehow impossible to even threaten Ted after bursting through his office window. For weeks, Mario had planned on tearing through that building and taking care first of Ted, then Chris Harmuckle, CFO of United HealthShare, then Milson Wills, the COO of the insurance company that killed his mother. But as the intended date drew near, he visited his mother's grave, the headstone yet installed, the dirt as dark and fresh as it had been weeks earlier when he and dozens of relatives said their final goodbyes. Mario just couldn't help but fixate solely on Ted's betrayal. He and Ted had something, and to just jot down his mother's fate on a piece of paper and play with her life like that had been too cold-hearted to forgive. Mario didn't know Chris or Milson, but he had gotten to know Ted, had let the older man inside of him, gladly. So, it was the playing with Mario's heart in two different respects that whittled down his hit list to a single person. Practicing his aim on a deserted forest road, Mario's angry mind raged. What would have happened if Ted had just done him and his mother one solid, had one measly conversation with a work buddy? Gia could have lived. How did Ted not see, or really choose not to see, that he had been Mario and his mother's last chance? Mario steadied his shaking anger to fire his ghost gun at a rusted can sitting on an even rustier fence. He would make sure the older man breathed his last breath, Mario's decision, because wasn't a human life just something to toy with, something to briefly consider before a callous finger pointed toward the gallows? However, in Ted's office, Mario's rage, the murky fuel that had orchestrated a plan, burst into Chamber Solutions, shot down the glass window of Ted's office, and imagined this very moment of taking a life, careful to breathe through the shot, squeeze, not pull, fell away. Because when they were together, it was hard not to return to old habits. It was impossible for the young man to see this avuncular, paunchy older guy with that hard, salty smell coming off of him and not want to hold Ted, be held by him. But conversely, and unsurprisingly, in a setting of violence, Ted wasn't moved to see Mario. He was terrified and made to feel small, a feeling Mario knew. He had spent years angling his chin just so, to hide his acne scars from showing up in pictures, and used exercise to get away from ever feeling that nothing of nothingness. And yet, an insurance company, in a short letter, revealed to him that no matter the planning or bulking or hiding, in some way, Mario would always be small and inept, human. And, seconds from deciding someone else's fate, it was clear that cruelty by his own hand wouldn't make him feel any bigger. If it had, the gun would have felt right at home resting in his hand, a symbol for what he would become at the firing of a kill shot, the almighty demolisher, skyscraping and undeniable. But instead, his fingers could barely manage a grasp of the DIY weapon, finding it an undesired foreign agent, an interloping thing to be dispelled. Broken glass at his feet, his ex-lover on the ground weeping, Mario understood that he'd become the one thing he despised, a sneering bully with a harsh boot, a person who yells when they know they don't have to. He'd become a taker who knows no other way, a weak-willed person who lets the bad mold him rather than allow the eventual good to save him. Stupid. Just what was he doing? Mario dropped the gun because Gia would have wanted him to. None of this would have been justified in her eyes, but at least, with the dull, hard piece on the ground, she could be proud that her son hadn't become a killer. And Mario, driven by the building smoke of that once raging flame, had no choice but to go to Ted. The young man had to make it right, tell Ted that he was deeply sorry and knew what he had attempted to do was wrong and sinister, a reflection only of his all-consuming grief, not his true character. It took a second for Ted to accept Mario into his arms, and behind the falling tears, the young man understood that he had done wrong, so very, very wrong, but he would spend the rest of his life making it up to Ted, showing him with direct action, showering him with heartfelt, repentant words. With the gift of Ted's salty scent, mixed with his pine-scented deodorant, Mario's mood shifted like the initial burn of cinnamon candy softens to a soothing heat. Even after all the chaos, the panic, the pain, and the pleading, at the first swivel of Mario's hips into the older man, it was on, their chemistry undeniable, no matter if they were next to a dumpster or getting ready to fuck on a desk that had just been used to barricade a door. Yes, their relationship, the story of them, wasn't pristine and crystal, but this was a new beginning that Mario believed they could get right, healing together, fixing the ways in which they had wounded each other. But in that moment, it was about sex. Clothes abandoned, both of them in position, one set of legs raised, the other anchored, Mario got even more vulnerable and summed up what it meant to know Ted, to spend time with him, to laugh with him and at him, to be physically intimate. It was everything, and the young man swore it must have been love. And the older man clearly felt the same. Ted spit on his hands, then spit on Mario's ass, and when the tip of his dick slid inside, the young man understood that it absolutely had to be love. Who else could forgive the full month of a cold shoulder, the way in which Mario shut Ted out and practically gave up what they had? Who else could forgive the gun? With Ted's hard dick pushing against the young man's prostate, Mario gasped, head exploding, lolling to the side in rapture, trying to maintain what composure he could. The words of his therapist echoing in his mind. Mario, be here, be now, be you. Mario managed to lift his eyelids, nearly closed by the overwhelming goodness pouring into his body, and stared into Ted's eyes. There, Mario saw all the beauty he could ever want. It was still true that because of Gia's passing, the young man's life would never be the same, but that didn't mean he was alone or that he could no longer be loved unconditionally. Ted delivered one of his hungry kisses, his hungriest yet, pulling hard on Mario's bottom lip before he released it, suddenly disengaged, looking off to the side. Then horror dawned on his face, starting with a slack mouth, then widened eyes. Mario couldn't handle the tension of this slowing down, so he gripped Ted's face, that gorgeous scruffy face, with those distinguishing wrinkles across his forehead, all that soft pink skin, and licked the older man's cheek, which failed to get Ted back into their groove. Mario pulled Ted's head toward him until they were nose to nose. "Fuck me," the young man cried. And that got the older man because in seconds, Ted shuffled his feet, reforming his steady stance, and thrust it into Mario, filling the young man fully, those brown eyes rolling back into his head, toward heaven, toward their future. "Fuck me." Ted pulled out and then shoved his dick right back in, and Mario screamed with pleasure, already losing the feeling in his legs. With another pump and another scream, Mario wasn't sure how long he would last. But before the young man had a moment to relearn the English language, Ted was already leaning next to his ear, probably with the news that he too was about to come. Wanting to honor the recurring synchronicity, Mario's hand drifted over to his hard dick, which was leaking a lake of pre-cum just south of his belly button. "Protect your head," Ted said soberly into Mario's ear, and before the young man could question the demand, the older man twisted away, off of Mario, toward the door, nearly pushing the young man to the floor. But Mario slapped a hand to the side of the desk, anchoring himself, and, before he could feel confused about Ted's breaking away or relief over catching himself, the gunshot rang out. And then things got still. A moment of silence. Another end to something wonderful. "Ted?" the young man asked, wriggling away from the edge of the desk. Then Mario stood, his hard dick softening more and more with each passing second. And, peering down, it was then that Mario wished he kept a better, sturdier mental picture of Ted's lips. Sure, they were thin, but there was a poutiness to what was there. Two tiny soft folds in the expanse of the older man's face. Some might have called them chicken lips, but to Mario, Ted's mouth was a remarkably generous thing, a place where the young man could land and understand that he was loved. But how could Mario remember them purely in that manner, or how he first saw them, or even how he'd been kissed by them, with the overwhelming and terrible picture of blood leaking out from between those lips, two parting rivulets pooling into the carpet as the SWAT team burst through the office door. Then the light began to fade from Ted's eyes, a dimming Mario knew all too well. Was there time for one last kiss? One last caress? Mario reached out to touch the older man until his own mouth landed hard against the carpet, his hands bound behind his back.
Ted, I love you! Ted!
Mario screamed. The young man wasn't sure if Ted could still hear him, unclear if the older man was already gone. But what could it hurt? Mario meant every word. The end. That was Baby Don't Shoot, a gay love story featuring a Luigi Mangione type. Did you enjoy yourself? Good. Consider supporting the author at buymeacoffee.com/SallyStraight, SALLYSTRAIT. Baby Don't Shoot is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. No generative artificial intelligence was used in the writing of this work. Copyright 2026.